about the collapse of the late Chalcolithic centralization and the rise of a new socio-political relations in the upper Euphrates region.
So, first of all, I would also thank Elena Rova and Ca' Foscari University and Humboldt Foundation for this opportunity. Arslan-Tepe period 6a was a crucial phase in the formation of a system that can be considered as a form of, we can say, early state, whose origins and structural characteristics had a great deal in common with similar and parallel societies in the Mesopotamian world, though the archaeological evidence has at the same time shown a basically local development of the centralization process at the site. The archaeological findings and the detailed and the interdisciplinary study of the material remains in the public area of the Arslan-Tepe Center have also shown that in the final part of the 4th millennium, an increasing distinction between the religious ceremonial and the economic, this is reconstruction of Temple B, and the ceremonial, and the economic administrative activities of the elite. These are the storerooms in the palace complex. Was occurring, evidenced clearly by the spatial and symbolic separation of these various types of acts in the palatial complex. The sphere of the elite business, that is to say the economic administrative sphere, besides involving an increasingly large number of individuals, in fact seems to have been by then separated and managed in a more secular way with respect to both the previous Arslan-Tepe period 7 ceremonial redistribution. These are some examples of the seal impressions that are more than 200, so this means a lot of people involved in this activity. Is really different with respect to the previous Arslan-Tepe period 7 ceremonial building, where there was a kind of ceremonial redistribution practices, and the centralized organization in the proper Mesopotamian Uruk environment. We are probably witnessing in the upper Euphrates region a process of secularization which took place very early and more quickly than in other Mesopotamian regions, probably linked to a different structure of the society and a consequent different relationship between the chiefs and their population in the Malatya plain. One crucial aspect of this diversity, is, in my opinion, the absence of urbanization. I want to go back, but how can I? No. No. Okay. Don't worry. So the absence of urbanization in this mountainous region of eastern Anatolia, differently from what had characterized the growth of political and economic centralization in the Mesopotamian sites. The Arslan-Tepe 6a settlement was even smaller than in period 7, and its surface appeared to have been largely occupied by public and elite structures. The site therefore appeared as a religious, political, economic, and administrative center where probably only the families involved in the elite activities were living. Given the huge numbers of people visiting the palace, as evidenced from the very large number of cretulae and different seals, and the intensity of the redistribution and administrative operations, we may infer that the population lived in scattered villages or hamlets in the surrounding plain. and had therefore retained a certain independence in the way they managed their daily activities, despite being subject to strong pressure from the powerful central institutions. The absence of urban growth can be, to some extent, explained by the environmental conditions of the Malatya area, which offers good quality land and abundance of water for agriculture, but is relatively small and hemmed in by the mountains, with the result that agricultural production could not be extended sufficiently, in my opinion, to support a large unproductive population, as had been the case in the large Mesopotamian cities and plains. The non-urban nature of the Malatya society, on the other hand, may have also been both the effect and the result of the presence there of a less stratified society, which must have been composed by basically two components, the elite and the common people. It is probable that these two factors, namely the lack of an urban structure, which where it does exist, creates a strong interdependency between the various social units, founding a system difficult to reverse, and a less complex and varied hierarchical society, must have been two of the main reasons for the early collapse of the Aslan Tepe centralized system. But I think that another element of instability and imbalance must have arisen from the presence of pastoralist groups moving in the mountains around the Malatya plain. They were probably included in the political economy of the palace in the second half of the fourth millennium, possibly bringing dairy products and metals. But when the central institutions started to undergo their deep crisis, these groups must have become more powerful in the negotiation of their rights to use and control the area, and the relationships between them, the Aslan Tepe elite, and the local sedentary populations must have become more critical, driving the palace institutions to an increasing need for defense. The finding of a high number of weapons in one of the Aslan Tepe palace buildings, showing a combination of swords and spears for the first time, which suggests the embryonic development of a military apparatus capable of organized forms of battle, and the construction of a defense wall blocking the monumental entrance to the palace are both evidence of this growing instability at the end of the 6A period. Power seems to have begun to change in its character and to be imposed by force, but without a solid social and economic basis, a system of the kind we have described, based on consensus and on the control of the staple production of a scattered population, could not withstand this impact. The new data obtained in recent campaign on the early third millennium levels at Aslan Tepe have revealed, through a sequence of superimposed settlements of different nature and consistence, a series of abrupt and radical changes following the collapse of the late Chalcolithic centralized system. This period, though marking a definitive overturning in the political and economic structure of the Aslan Tepe society, interestingly shows more elements of continuity than previously thought, and indicates the continuing interaction on new bases and with completely different power relations of various components, pastoral and agricultural, transhumant and sedentary, who were probably, at least in part, living in the area since the Chalcolithic. Whereas the local sedentary population maintained and reinforced their relations with the Middle and Upper Euphrates Early Bronze I communities, sharing with them post-Uruk traditions, the nomadic or semi-nomadic pastoral groups coming to the Malatya plain seem to have changed, or to have changed their relations, which at the beginning of the third millennium are definitely oriented towards the northeastern Anatolian and Transcaucasian cultures. At the end of the late Chalcolithic period, in the context of the well-known palatial complex, Aslan Tepe, though certainly linked to the Uruk world, was at the same time manifesting its clear diversity in the managing of much wider and autonomous external relations in various directions, among which particularly significant were the connections with the populations of the mountains located outside the large Mesopotamian-influenced cultural environment. In this context, the first red-black ware appears, with typological and technological characteristics clearly recalling north-central Anatolia. In fact, it started in period 7, but in period 7 is a minority, so there are very few examples, but in period 6a is part of the repertoire. The repertoire of shapes among which the so-called fruit stands stand out, the firing technique and the aesthetic taste evidently reproduce Alishar and Alajah models, though with distinctive traits. These vessels, in contrast with the main pottery production of the period, are all handmade, evidencing they are the product of different potters. They also represent a strict selection of forms and functional categories related to special uses, such as drinking and cult activities. The fruit stands, for example, have often been found, together with well-made examples inspired by them, in the palace temples and in cultic place. The appearance of this pottery as a part, though minoritarian, of the Aslan-Tepe 6a repertoire, with its special functional characterization, may relate to the presence in the centralized economic system governed by the palace elite of different groups, perhaps of non-sedentary population, moving in the surrounding regions and somehow linked to the north-central Anatolian world. The role of this cultural component in the Upper Euphrates region at the end of the 4th millennium is further confirmed by connections with central Anatolia in the late Chalcolithic levels of Tepejik. After the destruction of the palace by a violent fire and the definitive collapse of the early state centralized system, Aslan-Tepe seems to have become a place of contention and confrontation for new political entities and different cultural worlds. New differently oriented pastoral groups who, at any rate, still retain some of the previous red-black ware traditions in the manufacturing of their pottery, powerfully interfere in the 3rd millennium scenery of the Malatya plain. Between 3000 and 2900 BC, period 6b1, huts of transhumant herders with cultural traditions linked to the southern Caucasus environment occupied the area of the palace ruins, giving rise to complex and unstable relationship with the local rural population. These groups settled in scattered wooden huts built using the wattle and daub technique and leaving wide open spaces with rows of posts, probably fences, to staple their livestock. There were also different types of dwellings that have something in common with the Norshun Tepe area, with the other northeastern sites, with Transcaucasian, but it's not exactly the same technique of construction. The pottery on the whole marked a total break with the earlier Uruk-influenced late Chalcolithic wares of the palace face, and consisted practically of one type of handmade red-black ware with the typical shapes of the so-called Transcaucasian environment and with a very limited repertoire, using the same profile for vessels with different dimensions and different uses. No more the use of a selection of forms for special purposes as in period 6a, referring to an alien component incorporated in the local system, but a complete transformation of the repertoire according with the new needs of a transformed society, now in close connection with the world of the Kura-Araxes cultures. It is possible that these interactions intensified further with the increasing needs for metals, whose ores are richly present in the whole Circumpontic and Caucasian region. The results obtained in the last two campaigns have shown that what seemed to have been a short-lived and weakly structured occupation in period 6B1 was a much more substantial settlement, probably seasonally abandoned, but remaining a landmark for the groups living in the region. We discovered toward the summit of the Tell substantial constructions which certainly were chief residences and places for exercising political functions. This big building you see on the top right, only partly excavated. The first surprise was the recent discovery on the top of the mound of a distinct area bounded by a fence separating the upper zone from the rest of the settlement. This area contained only one single hut, larger in size than the others, perhaps the hut of a chief, which had been rebuilt twice with changes in the floor plan. The fence was accurately plastered with mud, partly rebuilt and used for a long time. In the area in front of this hut, and this was done repeatedly in all the phases, were accumulation of waste layers full of animal bones, mainly sheep and goats, which the archaeologists identified as mostly meat-rich parts and were therefore the leftovers of meals. Their abundance suggests that they may have been the remains of banquets or feasts, perhaps held before departing, in view of the fact that the remains had been left scattered on the ground. On the floor of a small side room annexed to the hut of the first phase, which was full of materials in situ, together with the usual red-black pottery of the Aslan Tepe 6B1 period, a well-made, light-colored jar with a Mesopotamian profile has been interestingly found. Moreover, inside this upper protected area, we found two beautiful seals, a baked clay cylinder seal and a stone stamp seal, also suggesting for their style and their same existence that this deeply different community may have retained some, albeit sporadic, relations with the Syro-Mesopotamian world may be managed by the community chiefs. Immediately to the south of the long fence, separating the upper area and partly cut by it, in the last 2012 campaign, we unexpectedly found a large and fairly imposing mud brick building with the peculiar arrangements of the room along a longitudinal axis. Its substantial architecture, which is in total contrast with the rest of the structure made of posts and mud, suggests that it must have had a preeminent role or at least important community functions. In the area adjacent to this building, toward the south-southwest, we have found an open space bounded by an irregular-shaped small wall and by a fence of posts running parallel to the building and perpendicular to the long upper fence, which contained an oval-shaped shallow pit dug into the floor, lined with timber, into which two small channels flowed. It is not easy to interpret this strange structure, but the fact that the adjacent hut stood out for a series of very peculiar small vessels with an anthropomorphic element consisting of two human feet, of which I know no close comparisons, suggests to me that the whole area must have been destined for particular activities, whether cultic, ceremonial in character, or somehow with high symbolic value. The main central building which is only partly brought to light so far, was badly varnished and full of materials in situ. In the excavated area, it has a long room with a very large central fireplace and a protruding wing flanked by two entrances. It communicated with another room, probably a storeroom, being its floor covered with broken pots and other materials, which is still largely to be brought to light. In this building, decorated red-black ware have been found that are very rare in the rest of the settlement, and also again a bowl in well-made, light-colored pottery of Mesopotamian type. In this building, also, two spearheads have been found that have the same typological characteristic as the spearheads found in the palace and as the spearhead found in the royal tomb, in the so-called royal tomb of the immediately later period. And in another room of the same building, we also found this interesting small metal sheets that were closed with nails and probably were surrounding, I suppose, the wooden shaft of the spearhead, together with some awls and other objects. So quite a lot of metal, because it is not a tomb, it's a building, so a living place. This building, as you can see in this picture, lay immediately above the levels leveling the ruins of the palace, that is the area covered by the roofing. The existence of this separate zone and the fence of posts staking it out becomes even more interesting when one considers this in relation to what was to happen in the following century. Between 2900 and 2800 BC, in the Aslan-Tepe period 6b2, when a monumental fortification wall in mud bricks with internal buttresses standing on a 5-meter this wall, stone base was built exactly on top of the large 6b1 building, forming a really fortified upper area. At the beginning of its construction, only post holes have been found, scattered over large areas paved with mud, both inside and outside the fortified area, except for one zone outside the wall and not very far from it, with a complex of mud brick rooms built in a sunken area. It is hard to say what this enormous wall may have defended, considering that no structure dating back to the period of its construction has been found inside it, at least in the part excavated so far. It is to this period that one can attribute the Aslan-Tepe royal tomb. The nearly empty space outside the wall would fit in very well with the special significance and unique character of this elite tomb, which must have occupied an area of respect in which the monument should have been highly visible. In the period that followed, in the second phase of 6b2, a village of agriculturalists arose around the wall, with their houses resting against it. The wall was still there at that time, but it may have partly lost its defensive function by then, as is also shown by the walling up of the entrance. Inside the fortification, a row of single rooms containing grain storage, siloi, pottery, and other equipment had been placed against the wall, whereas the rest of the space inside it remained substantially empty. Two stone cylinder seal with geometric motifs and a copper cylinder with a raised animal figurine typical of the Middle Euphrates early Bronze I were also found in two of the inner spaces between the wall buttresses, together with a great deal of ceramic materials. Despite the partial loss of its functionality as a defense structure, everything suggests that the wall had essentially retained the function of separating and distinguishing a special area, probably an elite one, who knows, probably also protecting it or safeguarding the property of the community or its chiefs. The external village, on the other hand, shows that the overall layout of the settlement had changed. The houses crowded the whole of the surface of the tell and formed a normal rural settlement with large quantities of charred cereals that had been burnt in the fire that destroyed the whole village and its walls. The pottery was once again mainly plain simple ware, clearly related to the early Bronze I cultures of the Middle and Upper Euphrates Valley, where the new societies had inherited forms and technologies derived from the late Uruk traditions. The red-black pottery, beside the cooking pots, is once again used for selected forms, in particular bowls. Despite the Syro-Mesopotamian character of the main pottery classes in the 6 B2 period and the basically agricultural economy, the new data emphasize a certain similarity and continuity in the location of an outstanding area and the general features of power with respect to the previous 6 B1 period. The nature of the power of these new chiefs seems to have been strongly linked to warfare and the capacity to manage conflicts, which was a feature alien to the 4th millennium Mesopotamian societies, and may have been due to a state of continuing conflicts brought about by the same collapse of the palace system. This new characteristics of the authority at Aslan-Tepe was expressed by both the establishment of a separate fortified area and by the large numbers of metal weapons. This state of conflicts itself probably caused the alternation of dominance and political control by different groups on the main site in the plain, which continues to be Aslan-Tepe, and is also evidenced from the violent fire which completely destroyed the 6 B2 settlement and its walls. After the village fire in period 6 B2, the site was once again abandoned and visited on a more occasional basis by nomadic groups linked to the northeastern Anatolian world and with some Transcaucasian relations. But this marked an even more substantial and definitive fracture in the cultural and political development in the Malatya plain. To conclude, at the very beginning of the 3rd millennium, the mountain population surrounding the Upper Euphrates region and linked to the Transcaucasian culture seemed to have taken over the leadership in the whole area, probably supplanting the Central Anatolian-related groups and acquiring a central role in the Malatya plain, where they coexisted and constantly interacted with the local rural population, absorbing many indigenous traditions of the Upper Euphrates Valley. It is possible that conflicts were present in the area also before, as might be shown by the early militarization of power in the 4th millennium palatial complex, as well as by its abrupt and definitive end. But after the collapse of the centralized system, it is clear that the appropriation of the site, in both effectual and symbolic terms, became the object of negotiation and conflicts between different social, cultural, and economic components living in the area. It is possible that the pastoral groups, may be more than one, moving around in the region had intense relations with northern and central Anatolian communities in the 4th millennium and turned their preferential relationship toward the Transcaucasian world at the beginning of the 3rd millennium, perhaps according with the new pressure from the northeast. They thus became part of the dynamic and varied Kura-Araxes world, but maintaining their already acquired tradition and identity. According to the Aslan-Tepe evidence, which is marked by continuous alternation of levels dominated by the Kura-Arax-like culture and levels characterized by the post-Uruk Upper and Middle Euphrates tradition for about 2 centuries, these populations seem to have partly negotiated and partly contended the dominance in the site. New political entities had emerged, and the power of tribal chiefs seemed to have taken over the control of the region, though in a less strong and systematically structured form with respect to the previous early state organization, whereas the capacity to manage the conflicts had probably become crucial. The history of power at Aslan-Tepe took a new turn, full of fluctuations, abrupt transformations, and instability, in connection with the transformation of the political and cultural environment in the entire East Anatolia and Kura-Arax world. Thank you.